welcome back into another episode of The Glue Guys. I'm Landen and Lucas, that's Richard Lucas, and we are on episode 12 now, I believe, something like that.
Something like that.
I have to start this episode off by apologizing again that we were not here last week, and I know we're The Glue Guys, but unfortunately, somebody wasn't feeling too well.
Hey, I'm still in the COVID protocols.
Okay.
But this is
you're gutting it out for us.
I'm gonna gut it out. I'm in the quarantine room right now.
Oh, you're in the quarantine.
Trying to get this done, but we couldn't let another week go by without the Glue Guys jumping on. So thanks for allowing me to rest up, and hopefully I can get through this. I will say I'm still having quite a bit of NyQuil. It's early, so I feel like we should have the disclaimer.
Hey, at least, let them know in the beginning. So anything you do from this point forward, they understand.
Exactly. So that's kind of the disclaimer. So if you're worried about something or be offended by something, then please turn off the episode and then join us again next week. If you're okay and you're ready, then let's do this.
Yes, and we unfortunately had two guests this week that had things come up, so we did not get a guest until I actually did get Scott Chasen. He's former writer, now doing some TV stuff in Kansas. So this episode will be another one talking Kansas basketball and talking, what's going on right now. We won't do too much reminiscing like we do with some of our guests because they did just come off of a 2-game losing streak, and there's a lot to talk about. So we're going to get into that. We're going to have Scott join us and get that going here in a minute.
Nice.
All right, before we move on to our next segment, let me tell you guys a little bit about our partners over at Bet Rivers. If you haven't already signed up with Bet Rivers, now's the time because they're offering a $250 match bonus for your first deposit. But what sets them apart is that they require just one playthrough to turn your bonus into cash. With their new Rush Pay instant approval, withdrawing your winnings is safer, more secure, and more reliable. Be sure to get in on the action today by joining betrivers.com or downloading the Bet Rivers app. You must be 21 years or older, and if you have a gambling problem, please call 1-800-GAMBLER.
You're so proud of yourself, I can tell.
I thought that was pretty good, right?
Trust me, you are getting so much better at that. But you haven't gotten where you said you can do it,
without looking.
Yes, that's what I'm waiting for.
It's because you would have to commit some time to do that, and I just there's not one moment in time where I'm like chilling throughout the day, and I'm like, let me just go ahead and remember this Bet Rivers commercial ad read. No, I mean, I think for not doing this, I thought it was doing pretty well. So if you have any problems, as always, call 1-800-GAMBLER. And now we are going to bring on Scott. Scott, my man, what's up?
Hey guys, how are you doing?
Hello.
Doing pretty well. Well, he's not doing very well. He's in COVID quarantine right now, but I'm doing all right.
Well, I hope you're doing okay. Hope you're feeling okay and can get back soon.
Yeah, thank you. When my son just, cracks the whip and gets his dad out of, basically wrestles him out of bed for this, it's important. So he wanted to get
we already missed 1 week. We couldn't miss 2 weeks.
We couldn't miss the second week. So, sometimes you got to play hurt, right? You just got to, tape up and just get back out on the court. So that's what I'm doing.
That's a great point. Landon actually told me, he said that you were being incredibly lazy this week. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but now it all makes sense.
Yeah, that's it. But I'm trying to bring it, though, even though I just want to go back to bed.
Well, Scott, thanks for coming on. And I want to get started with my first question after the loss last night. What was your takeaways from that? And then what was, in your mind, the key reason behind the Kansas loss to TCU?
Well, I think my takeaways would probably be a little bit more tame than certainly if you were following the game on Twitter message boards, where I was surprised. It seemed like as much of a meltdown as I've seen in a while. And I think it's because Kansas didn't look like the more athletic team. Kansas wasn't the more athletic team. And when that happens, sometimes you can kind of get embarrassed without getting embarrassed. You get dominated on the glass. You look slow. You look unathletic. And people watching the game look at this team and say, how can this team go on a run in March? To me, what kind of showed itself were problems that have showed up all year, which is when Kansas is not the more athletic team, and Kansas in other games, not this game, but isn't the more quote unquote talented team. Kansas has to execute at a really, really high level, especially offensively. And then with some of the stuff it does defensively, although this isn't a great defensive team, to win those games. And at times in the first half, I thought the execution was okay, especially getting in transition. But defensively, Kansas had too many breakdowns. And it was very clear to me that TCU's sort of overwhelming athleticism kind of bothered Kansas in a way that hasn't shown up for a while. There was a moment late in the game where Jalen Wilson was kind of out-muscled going for a ball. And he just turned around and you could tell this dude was done. And Jalen Wilson is the energy guy. He's amazing on the glass. He's a very good player. But you could tell he was annoyed. At what point are these guys just going to chill for a little bit? And I thought that was kind of a telling moment of the game because TCU just looked like the more athletic team.
So, Scott, is there anything that you saw last night? And again, you alluded to fans. You know what fan is short for, right? So we're going to just the casual fan, we're going to take that aside, but just from your analysis of what you saw, are you worried at all about this team and their abilities to make a Final Four?
Well, I think this team is probably less matchup proof when you get into the tournament than some previous teams. And Landon, I'm sure the team that people bring up to you would be your senior year team a lot, because that team was kind of the inverse, right? Everyone had to match up with them. And you think about that game you played against Purdue, where everyone was saying, well, they're so big, how is Kansas going to deal with them? And then it was like, well, it turns out Kansas, it turns out Kansas is really fast. And to give you some credit, Caleb Swanigan had like a decent game. That's because he shot some threes. He wasn't having as much success inside when he went up against you. And this Kansas team can do some of those similar things. I think for Kansas to really impose what it wants to do on other teams, it has to play fast. It has to play as athletic as possible, and it has to get its shot makers going. I don't necessarily know that Kansas has been able to dictate that more than some previous teams. So I guess this is my long answer of saying I do think Kansas is still capable of going on a run, but I think there are probably 4, 5, 6 teams that you would look at a bracket that you might have to play before the Elite Eight, and you would say, man, it would really help to avoid that team. It would help to avoid an Arkansas. It would help to avoid, one of these teams with really quick guards, or with a big man that's either, super, super physical and big that might bother kind of a hobbled David McCormick as he deals with injury, or a mobile 5-man that might put that 5 spot for KU out of position. So I think Kansas, to me, is still a second weekend NCAA tournament team. I expect them to make at least the Sweet 16. And when you have Bill Self, he basically never loses in the Sweet 16 except for the Michigan game that one time. So, if you get there, you're in the game. You've got a chance to make a Final Four, to go to the Elite Eight. But I have a hard time seeing Kansas getting to an actual Final Four unless 1 or 2 things break right in the tournament, which, let's be fair,
that happens.
It happens all the time. I mean, KU in 08 played like a 10 seed to get to the Final Four.
Yeah.
Kansas State got, I looked this up yesterday, it was like 8 seed, 16 seed, 5 seed, 11 seed would have been their path in 2018. I mean, it happens all the time. So maybe not matchup proof, but if Kansas can avoid those few teams, I think they do still have a pretty good chance to go on a run.
Yeah, the tournament it's so interesting how it works, because it can, you could just have some things break right in your favor, and not only within the games but within the other games based off of, like you said, who you're playing to get there. So, I think anything's possible, but something that comes to mind for me is that team in I believe it was 2017 that made the Final Four. A lot of people, including myself, weren't sure. You had Devontae, who's killing all season and whatnot, but weren't sure during the regular season, as that season came to an end, whether they were going to be able to make a deep run. And then they go ahead and make that deep run, beat Duke to make the Final Four. But something that stood out to me was the play of Malik Newman, which I think stood out to a lot of people. The March Madness Malik. What are your thoughts as far as who that would be for this team if somebody does come out, in a couple weeks and just puts on a performance and, helps this team to a Final Four? Who would that person be for Kansas this year?
I think it's a good question. And first of all, it's a great comparison. I've seen that kind of go around. I know Jesse Newell of the Kansas City Star actually wrote a piece, and he compared the way the teams profile offensively and defensively. I think the really important thing to remember with Malik Newman is you kind of saw signs of his breakout starting. He had a game in January against Iowa State where he scored like 20-something points. And after the game, media was asking him, is this the start of Malik Newman figuring it out? Because behind the scenes during your senior year, Landon, I remember talking to Bill Self and hearing that, hey, this guy's going to be like a 20-point-a-game scorer. And this guy could be an All-American. He could be the best scorer on the team.
He was good, yeah.
Yeah, and we hadn't seen at that point, right? Because he's sitting out with the red shirt and transfer. And so it took a while, but you saw that sign in January. And then by mid-February, he had really kicked it in gear. So ever since then, I've been a little bit more hesitant to kind of predict a breakout guy if they aren't showing signs. But by that logic, I think Jalen Wilson would probably be the closest thing to it, just because you've already kind of seen what it looks like when he's playing athletically, when he's playing well. Much of the conversation around KU right now is on Remy Martin. I think Remy Martin has a role to play on the team, especially I think if you want to talk positives from TCU, the absolute most promising thing I saw was that Remy Martin looked a lot better defensively after basically one game against Baylor, where he didn't look good at all. He didn't look playable defensively. He looked good offensively, but really struggled. And then game to game, you saw he looked more comfortable. He looked more athletic. He looked improved. I'm just a little hesitant to extrapolate that and say this guy's going to go back to scoring 20 a game. I think he'll be a decent player. I think he'll be a key bench piece. And I think Bill Self putting him in a lot, including pulling Dejuan to put him in one time when Bill Self trusts Dejuan Harris a lot. I think that tells you that he has a role to play. But to go back to the question, I think it would have to be Jalen Wilson, because we've already seen signs of what it looks like when he's playing well. He can do things that no one else on the team can do, especially when he plays the 5 spot. And he's the closest thing that Kansas probably has to some kind of a game-changing piece that, your 4-man can grab it in transition and take it up the court, and not many teams will be able to match that. So I think Jalen Wilson would probably be the guy I look at.
So Scott, when we've asked a few, we've been, this is episode 12, by the way. So we're rolling when it comes to episodes. But we've had players on, former players, current players, and coaches and things like that. We've had a couple of media members, but one of the questions I wanted to ask you from a media standpoint, someone who's out there kind of has the pulse of the fan and things like that. What do you think? Do you think that it's still winning the Big 12 still has that same level of importance to the average KU fan? Or do you think that they're kind of beyond that and it's more like, hey, just get to a Final Four. That's all that matters. What do you take from a media side?
I think that's a great question, because I was watching Wisconsin play last night, and Wisconsin, which is ranked like right around the top 10, won a game against another team. I think Purdue ranked 8 or something like that. And the fans stormed the court, and they stormed the court because Wisconsin locked up a share of the Big Ten. And I was like, whoa, like that is a fan base that is excited to lock up a share of a conference title. Like, to me, it was almost mind blowing for a second, just because, in my time covering Kansas, which hasn't been forever, but I've seen more often than not, Kansas wins the Big 12, and more often than not, Kansas wins the Big 12 outright without sharing the title. I think fans still care about that. I think they get nervous at the prospect of not winning it. But I think the focus now has been placed so much on postseason success because of a perceived lack of it, maybe by Bill Self. I don't always think that's fair, because 1, the tournament is so random. 2, you deal with an injury at the wrong time. Like, take the Andrew Wiggins team that won the Big 12. They don't have Joel Embiid in the postseason. They don't really do anything in March. They win one game, then they lose the next to Stanford. And like, that's a bad season now when, in theory, the guy who could have been your second best player at the end of the year, he's not even on the team. And yet somehow the body of work is outweighed by a game or two. So I think the fan base probably has shifted its focus to the tournament because KU fans want to, win another title and want to make another Final Four. But I really like that you asked that question just because of watching that Wisconsin ending last night and seeing very clearly what winning a Big Ten title meant to so many people there. And I'm sure it's the same thing in other conferences, the ACC, the SEC. KU fans who are unhappy with KU's tournament run will point out programs like Duke that don't win the ACC every year, or say, you don't have to win your conference to have a great season. But at the end of the day, if you don't win your conference, that also puts a lot of pressure on your team to do something in March, because if you don't, then what was the point of your season, basically, especially if you're a fan of a blue blood program? So again, long answer, but I think fans probably care maybe a little too much about the postseason now. It still matters. It matters a ton. If you make a Final Four, that's a great team that will be remembered for a long time. But I do think fans have shifted their focus a little bit away from the regular season, although they will be upset if Kansas isn't able to win these last two to close out a Big 12 title.
Well, I'll say something. I mean, with the teams that I was on in the middle of that streak, it was crazy how much it was emphasized, or how much we felt that pressure of keeping the streak alive. And it wasn't as much like, I don't know how it would be if there wasn't this streak, if it was just, hey, we got to go out and win the Big 12. But it always came back to don't be that team, just don't be the team to end the streak. And it is interesting because without that, I'm not 100% sure how much pressure or how much we would even be focused on winning the Big 12. But because of that, that was like, it was so much emphasis. And there was, when we needed to win big games, we would just out all week, we were talking about, we have to win this because we can't be the team to end this streak. We have to win this. We have to win this. And so it is interesting to think like now without that, yeah, you still want to win it, but it's probably a different feeling than when you're about to beat, a record that's been around for many, many years.
Yeah, well, think of all the legendary games that have occurred during the streak that were regular season Big 12 games, right? Like games that normally you would hold in high regard, or you would think a lot of, but like Devontae Graham against Texas Tech is one of those that always comes to mind, of just like going on the road to play a really good Texas Tech team. And I think that actually clinched the league outright or gave Kansas a 2-game lead or something. But just the way that game unfolded, and I mean, there were so many. Obviously, Frank's senior year had a bunch of those games. Even the 2019-20 KU team that was really, really good and didn't get a chance to validate that in March because of the pandemic, that team had the Baylor game. That was sort of legendary. And again, that didn't even lock up the league. That was just more of a kind of classic clash. So, it always seemed like – I actually tweeted this yesterday. It always seemed like during the streak, KU teams had a way, they would have this like one game they have to win, and they might not even be the favorite. They'd be playing a really good team on the road or something, and you just have to win it. And it's interesting to hear you say how much it was emphasized, because it felt like for a long time Kansas would always win those games. And yeah, I was always curious if there were, if it came from the coaches, if it came from the players, if it came from the fans, where that kind of emphasis came from, because it seems like you guys won those huge games whenever it was needed.
It was from everyone, all the way to former players. The former players that hang around Lawrence or whatnot, or who are still around the team often, they would come in before in practices and stuff, and you just felt it, from the way that they were talking, or from, the way the coaches were talking. And then as you've been there longer, then it becomes by my junior, senior year, I was trying to bring along the freshmen, to the Josh Jacksons and those guys to understand how important it was. And it did feel that way. And, like you said, a game like that one at Baylor, that's one of those ones where it's like, hey, we have to win this to keep the streak alive. But that's where I'm curious, like now that was all the talk, that's what we use as motivation. And I know there's still a lot of motivation, but it is interesting, like where that's shifted now. I have a question for you as far as, and I actually asked this question. This was our sub in, sub out, I think, last week. But we were talking about Remy and we were talking about David. And the question was, come March, which one do you feel is more important to this team between a David that is consistent with, a double-double and can put up good numbers, can play solid underneath, doesn't have a game, kind of like last night, but, he's had some where he just, isn't the same, or a healthy Remy that is, solid on defense, distributing the ball, scoring well. What do you think is more important to this team come tournament time?
Well, I think the answer is still probably David McCormick, because I think if you can get enough out of Remy in stretches, especially with the emergence of Joe Yesufu, I think that can be enough to sway some of the games. But I have a hard time seeing Kansas doing much of anything if David McCormick is going to have one or two of those games where it just feels like he's not there. And, with David McCormick, I really do feel bad from the perspective of he's clearly not super healthy. He's dealing with the foot thing. He's got a knee thing on top of that from a fall he took. And you can kind of see it in his mobility. There are times where, he's never been the most mobile, agile guy, but there are times where he slips or he just clearly can't hold his own in a situation he should be able to. And it's probably that leg or the knee or whatever bothering him. But I just think he's so important to so many different pieces of what Kansas does. There are so many times where, the ball goes into the post, there's a double, or even if there isn't, he takes a dribble just to move the defense a little bit, kicks it to someone, ball works around, and it ends up in an open three-point shot. And I think that's been a key to Kansas having, one of the most efficient offenses in the nation for pretty much the entire season, even playing without Remy Martin. This is a much better offensive team than defensive team. And Remy Martin is an offensive piece who would help take that to the next level if healthy. But David McCormick has taken it or has helped it get to the next level with what he is right now. So I think if you could hit a button and get consistency out of David McCormick and really avoid the bad games, which for the most part since Kentucky, he's only had a couple of down performances. I think you would absolutely take that. For Remy, I think the challenge has just been, for him, he's got to carve out a role and figure out what that role is. And I think Bill Self is trying. Like, Bill Self has already played him more than I expected him to play coming back. So I think Bill Self wants to find him that role. But I think it's really ambiguous right now, just how they're going to use him. It seems like he's okay with whatever they've got for him. And it seems like he's trying and he's giving his effort, even if he isn't 100%. But I just think there's so much more that needs to be figured out there, maybe even from a kind of schematic and strategy perspective, that I think you'd take David McCormick at this point.
Well, it's interesting you say that about Remy because and Dad, you remember this, the conversation we had with Coach Roberts, I think it was, who had mentioned that this was back when he was healthy, and he was struggling with going into a game with a predetermined, hey, I'm going to pass every time, or I want to do this or that. And Coach Self was telling him, listen, just like let the game, take what's given to you. And I'm curious now, that you brought that up, like maybe as he's coming back into it, if he was struggling, a little bit while he was healthy with that, now that he's been out of the rotation, hurt, coming back in, maybe he is dealing with, wondering, hey, how should I insert myself and trying to, force things a little, that could be coming back into play a little bit, especially now that there's even more factors than there were before.
Yeah, well, player mindset is always so interesting to me. And I actually have a Landen Lucas story that no one has ever heard before, including your dad. This is
wow.
100% a true story. So we were at the Hawk one night. No, I'm just kidding.
That's a good way to start.
Yeah. No, so I was a freshman in college. This was before my time covering the team, and Landon was still in college too. And I can't remember what it was for, but for one class, I had an option to go to a bunch of different lectures, and I found myself at one. And Landon, you ended up actually being there too, and we both came in kind of late. And we're sitting in the back, and when it was over, I realized that, oh, hey, it's Landen Lucas sitting next to me, and I just made a comment, something to the effect of like, I think I really appreciate the way you rebound the ball. I think that's a pretty cool trait because you do it differently than a lot of guys. And you probably don't remember this. I swear to God, this is true. You turned to me and said, well, I want to score a little bit more too. And in that moment, I thought, hey, here's a guy who would later turn out to be one of the all-time KU glue guys. And you've got pride. Like, you were a tremendous player in high school. You turned into a very good player in college, especially like I think of the matchup you had with Diamond Stone in the NCAA tournament, where, as I said at the time, you effectively taught him how to play basketball, was the way I put it at the time. Like, you just got to remember that like mindset is such a tricky thing. And it's probably what I respect most about athletes who are able to change a role and find a way to be productive differently, which is that you've done something for so long. And in Remy's case, he's been the guy for so long. And I don't think it's possible to change some of that without dealing with maybe the quote unquote mental side effects of, well, I don't really know how to play now, so maybe I'll just go into this game thinking I'm going to pass a lot more, or I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. So I think I get why that's been an adjustment, and it wouldn't shock me, like you said, if it continues to be one, maybe more so now, just because that his role is different and things are changing and moving around, and that's only going to complicate things further.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I wasn't sure which direction you were going with that. So I'm glad it wasn't that he turned to you and said something stupid or something. But I know Landon. I know he's such a good kid that he would never do anything like that. But so when you look at this overall team, and we as glue guys ourselves, we tend to look at things and situations, and then players who impact the game maybe in ways that are just not shown. And so I guess my question to you is not so much who's a glue guy, but is there a player on this team that is underrated, that the average fan just doesn't realize, even if they only play a little bit, what their impact is on any given game?
Yeah, I think 3 come to mind. 1 bigger role guy and 2 smaller role guys. I'll go quickly because we could be here a while. The first answer that popped into my head was Dejuan Harris, because I think a lot of people appreciate that. A lot of people appreciate that he's a good player. He's a good point guard. I think he takes an unfair rap sometimes, but he does a lot of things defensively, just bothering guys or putting guys offensively in the right spots that I think is really underrated. But he almost plays, I guess, not too much to be a glue guy. I think he still qualifies. But, in terms of smaller role guys, actually the first guy who came to mind was Mitch Lightfoot. And don't get me wrong, I think there's a drop-off when Kansas goes from David McCormick to Mitch Lightfoot. I think there are things David McCormick does that Mitch Lightfoot can't do. But he's turned that hook shot into a weapon. He's found ways to kind of pick his spots and bring energy to the game that I don't think is always there. And between, Mitch Lightfoot and KJ Adams, who is going to be the other player, although I think the fan base actually really likes KJ Adams, which is funny because both guys, play a smaller role. I think between the two of them, you've seen a number of games where Kansas kind of just needs a stopgap or something at the 5 spot to either spark the team, to get the offense back on track, or defensively just to help with switching and change matchups around. And so I think in KJ's case, it's been defensively. He's brought a switchability to KU that can help stabilize lineups. And for Mitch, surprisingly, it's been offensively. Like, there have been games this year where Kansas is in a drought, or David McCormick lets a couple balls get away from him, and Bill Self turns to the bench and throws him in. And it just seems like it's not just the scoring. It's not his point total. It's the stabilizing presence of, okay, this guy's been on the team for 6 or 7 years, whatever it is, or 6 years. And I know where he's going to be. I know the shot this possession is going to generate. It's going to be a hook shot over his left shoulder or whatever. Like, and it just seems to restore trust and calm and stability to where even if he isn't doing anything flashy or spectacular, it kind of gets KU back on the right track. So those would be the guys that come to mind. But this team has like a million of those candidates, especially if Kansas ends up going on a run in March. Like, you could see Joe Yesufu making a play where, people talk about him holding it together, or, Zach Clements, we'll see how he's doing after looked like he got hit in the eye. I'm sure he'll be fine. But like, he came in and got a big rebound. I think there's the potential for those guys, but Mitch and KJ would be the 2 smaller role guys that I really see as kind of stabilizing presences on this team.
Yeah, I thought Zach in the few seconds he played pretty well. And KJ, I've always been a fan of KJ's, and I think that he'll have a role, in some games down the stretch, just depending on matchups and whatnot. And then, Mitch is we already dubbed him honorary glue guy when he was on the podcast earlier, just because of the way he thinks and stuff. He goes into the games understanding the ways he can impact. Hey, let me try to do this, try to do that, instead of going out there and, hey, let me get a shot up. That's the last thing he's thinking of. So I think that those are all real good answers. I know we've gone a little long, but if you have a little bit more time, I have a sub in, sub out for you guys. So
Sure.
you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so sub in, sub out. And this is something that we kind of covered, but I want to know from both of you guys, whoever wants to start. Kansas is going to win the next 2 games and clinch a share of the Big 12 title. Are you guys subbing in or subbing out? Whoever wants to take it first can go ahead.
Well, Scott, as our guest, I will defer this first part to you.
Sure. So sub in would be that I'm taking this to happen. And I do think in this case it will. I'm very interested, I should say, in the response from Kansas after this game, because TCU played great. Kansas did not play well. And, one of the telling quotes I found from after the game from Bill Self was when he said that TCU was getting 30-70 balls. And when Bill Self talks about, he wants you to get more 50-50 balls than your opponent. If he's saying the other team's getting 30-70, he is not a happy man. And so I expect Kansas to rebound and respond. And I'd be pretty surprised if a Bill Self team lost 2 straight to the same opponent, basically no matter who that opponent was. And Kansas hasn't lost on senior night in 40 years. So they're hard to pick against. But look, these games won't be a cakewalk either. If Kansas doesn't show up either night, Kansas hasn't beaten Texas in a while. And that will be a difficult matchup too. So I would take Kansas in both, but I would probably take Kansas close in both.
So I'm going to switch it up just a little bit, but I'm not going to disagree 100% with Scott. I do think that KU wins both of these, but I actually do think they're going to win handily. And the reason being is that, just like you alluded to, TCU, although a very, very good team, it might surprise some folks in the NCAA tournament. Self is going to figure it out. And now you get back to Allen Fieldhouse, there's just no way in the world that he's going to allow that team to march into to the Fieldhouse and beat them just a few days after losing to them. So that game for sure. And then, as you said as well, the senior game as well. There's something about it. I was at Landen's senior game. They were down to, I think it was Oklahoma.
It was, yeah.
And there's something about the magic of that place. It just won't allow a team to lose. And so I just kind of have this sense that you're gonna see 2 back-to-back games where KU's going to put it together, and they're going to have 2 double-digit wins.
Wow. And I'm going to sub in also, but I'm curious. I want them to handle it easy, but I do think it may be tough. I mean, you got to remember that this is going to be 48 hours or something in between games, and they just got manhandled by this team. I mean, coach can talk to them and do whatever, they could watch film and stuff, but I mean, I'm curious because I have never in my time that I can remember play a team except for like AAU days or something back to back that quickly. And I'm curious, after getting kind of physically dominated like that, it wasn't as much from what I saw, like a bunch of X's and O's and stuff. It was just, they just played harder and better. I'm curious to see how that goes. But I will say, if they start off well, I could see it being a game that, they do a good job putting their foot on their throat, jumping ahead. And then the Texas game, that's going to be interesting because the one factor about the Texas game at Texas and we're going to that game, so I'm excited. Hopefully, we are. We'll see.
If I can get out of the protocols,
we'll see.
If I can make it back in time.
But the one interesting thing about that Texas game is the Coach Howard dynamic of it, which I think they kind of played up a little bit, but like that was a guy that's been at Kansas for a long time. He understands it, and I thought that the game plan that they put defensively against Kansas was pretty damn good. And we've seen senior nights start to go off bad, and like you said, the field house willed them back. But I don't know. I'm curious. I think that these next two games will show a lot as far as the tournament. If they come out and they respond well and do exactly what you're saying, Dad, then I think that that would be very good momentum. They could get past this. But if it's a struggle in some ways, and maybe they drop one, which I don't see happening, I wouldn't bet that they would. But I think that's a tough one to swallow moving forward.
Yeah, well, I will tell you that it's, they've played these teams. This is not a new scout. So I don't think you got to set it. It's not really an X and O deal at this point. So the quick turnaround doesn't worry me. They know what they need to do, and you could, even in the locker room right after the game, what went wrong. So you don't need to watch a bunch of film. And so I just think that this is gut check time for them. And I think that when you have a coach as good at pushing the right buttons at the right time as Coach Self is, that's why I think that they get it done over the next week.
Scott, what do you think? You think that are you changing your mind at all? You still think it's going to be a close one?
Well, I think if there's one that's more likely to be not close than the other in favor of Kansas, I think it would probably be the TCU game for the reasons that you just talked about. Like, we can all visualize Kansas coming into this game a little bit ticked off about the result of the last game. Bill Self saying some things over the last few days, and that just kind of being a hornet's nest. I remember a game against Texas Tech. I'm struggling to think of the year, but it was right when I think Marcus Garrett went down with an injury, and the NCAA ruled on Silvio like the day before and said he was going to be out for 2 years or something like that. And the next day, Kansas just came out on fire and smoked Texas Tech in the field house. And I think it might have got a little closer late. I think Kansas won by 20 or something like that. But that was a game that was over 2 minutes into the game. And Chris Beard even said after the game, he was like, we knew what we were getting ourselves into today, and like we knew what it was going to be in here. And I could definitely see TCU being that. I'm just interested in Texas because Texas is so good defensively. And you mentioned the game plan that Texas had to kind of face guard Ochai Agbaji. And for a good part of that game, some other guys on Kansas stepped up. But then late in the game, when you needed some buckets and your number one option is kind of being taken away, I think it made it a lot harder to score. So I'm very curious to see what Bill Self will have as a counter for that. And that's why I could see that one being a little bit more close.
That TCU game, it is interesting, though, because those guys, they know in the back of their head what they're walking into in the field house. And after it's all really interesting dynamics going into this game between the quick turnaround, just getting upset, the importance of this game as far as Kansas needing a win, coming back to the field house. Like that's going to be a fun one.
Can I throw out something to you guys?
Yeah.
This is something that I've never said. So Scott, you're in for a treat, I think. So, and again, NyQuil, that's my disclaimer. You weren't on the NyQuil line. So it just, when you talked about what they're getting into, it reminded me of a quick story where when I played at the University of Oregon, and we had played against Arizona, Lute Olson, Arizona. And they came up to McCourt my senior year, and they were ranked number 2 in the country at the time. And it was a Thursday night game, ESPN. We were very stoked because ESPN was rare for us, but it was an ESPN game, and we beat them. Kids stormed the court and all that stuff. And so we were, and then we beat ASU on that Saturday. So that weekend we were 2-0, and I remember seeing in the newspaper that we were 2-0, and we were pretty excited about ourselves at that point in time. But when we went back to McHale, and we were in the layup lines, And one of the players, I'm at my side, one of the players on the other side comes my way, and he goes like this. He goes, ass whooping. Literally was doing like the evil person is like here go like this, like ass whooping. Like they could not wait to beat the crap out of us, and they did. We lost by like 25 that night at McGill. Wow. I mean, it was ridiculous how bad they beat us. And so I just remember that because it was like
we need Mitch to go to half court and do that to TCU.
Exactly, just because it intimidated the crap out of us because we just thought we talked so much smack to them. They were like, "Yeah, come to our house, come to our house." It was crazy, and then they beat us so bad that you know how when you're losing by so much that they take the starters out and they put in the subs, and then that's what it was. Like I didn't even see the last like 6-7 minutes of the game because of all the subs were in for us. So it was a bad situation. So that's what I think is going to happen to Texas
ass whooping
University.
Well, the closest version of that to a KU game I can remember was the Ben McLemore year. Kansas lost to a bad TCU team, and that was the game where Bill Self was, this team wouldn't have beat the Topeka YMCA teams or whatever.
I remember
that next TCU game that was back at the Fieldhouse. I remember the halftime score was 38-9, and Ben McLemore had more points than TCU at halftime. It was like 12-9. But I just remember, I think it was a minute into that game. I think it was the coach before Jamie Dixon. I can't remember now. But TCU's coach called a timeout like a minute into the game to be like, hey, something's going on here. Like, we need to calm this down before it gets going. And Kansas still won by a bunch. But, yeah, 38-9 at halftime. That's an incredible story, though. I'm glad you told that. No NyQuil needed here.
The ass whooping.
Ass whooping.
Well, now you got me convinced that Kansas is going to come out and smoke them.
That's what made it through my head.
Yeah, we'll see.
Good teams don't like to lose like that, man.
And I think that had a lot to do with not only the coaching, but the players on that team. And so we're going to learn a lot about the players on this team tomorrow and how they respond to that TCU game. So, well, Scott, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. It was fun talking some Kansas basketball with you. We'll be out there, hopefully, for the Texas game. So we may see you out there. But thank you for your time and coming on the show.
Thank you guys for having me.
Have a good one.
See ya.
Well, I always like story time from the Oregon days from you, and I know you probably peed down your leg a little bit when you heard that from the guy. But
well, I don't know if I peed down my leg, but I will tell you that it was intimidating, and we just you've said this before how. The opposing team, when you go into Allen Fieldhouse, you kind of almost anticipate you're going to lose.
Yeah.
And it was really the same thing for McHale Center because during my 4 years that I was there at the University of Oregon, from 87 to 91, they did not lose a home game during those 4 years there. So there were players that were during that 4 years that never lost. And they hosted a tournament in the preseason where they brought in other really good teams as well, and they never ever. So I started thinking about the fact that as a home team, you never went to the locker room after a game with an L. I mean, it's amazing. So as an opponent, you go in there going, the likelihood.
What's so crazy about it though is and I've mentioned this before. It's not only a mental thing. It's so mental that it carries over into physically feeling like you're playing against a different team. I haven't experienced that. I mean, I'm trying to think, when we went into Kentucky, we did well, and hostile environments, we seem to do well. But when a team would come into Allen, like you would just play them somewhere else, and then they come in and you bump them and they move a little bit farther, and they don't jump quite as high, and just everything feels different. Like your matchup was just a completely different player, and so I'm curious to see how this TCU game goes. It's going to be very interesting, and that was a great story to kind of give you an idea of how this team should respond. And I hope that one of the players goes up and rubs his hands. Oh man, that's hilarious. All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up now.
Wait. There's one quick question though I have. Is that so? Remember, I'm on NyQuil right now, and so does your shirt have multiple Nikes on it? I just want to make sure and see.
You are not. Yes, this
okay.
is. This is Nike just deciding to print 3. It's part of the shirt, so.
Okay. Because this whole time I'm like, oh my God, I can't. I'm seeing like triple Nike logos here. So okay, all right. Just want to make sure it wasn't just me.
Yeah, I planned this because I knew you were going to be on NyQuil. So. All right. Well, we will be back next week. We're going to try actually while we're out in Kansas, of course, if we make it there. To get something set up while we're there. Hopefully get a good guest, Coach Self or somebody like that. And then if not, then we'll be back next week on Zoom again. And no more missed weeks. We're heading into crunch time of March Madness and everything. So thank you guys for listening in, and we'll be back with a new episode next week.